Hi everyone, welcome to the channel After All That Years.
I never thought I'd end up in a county jail cell, but there I was, listening to metal doors clank shut behind me for the first time in my 52 years. The stale air felt like it was choking me, and all I could think about were those accusations still ringing in my ears from the courtroom. Here's the thing that'll blow your mind. I wasn't locked up for robbery or assault or any real crime. I was behind bars because my ex-wife Diane had convinced a judge that I was a deadbeat father who refused to support our 8-year-old son Tyler. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't destroying my life. That morning's court hearing had been an absolute disaster. Diane showed up looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Perfectly styled hair, professional outfit, just the right amount of makeup to look stressed but put together. She had this whole performance down to a science. When it was her turn to speak, she dabbed at her eyes with tissues and told the judge how I'd abandoned my responsibilities. "He hasn't sent money for school clothes in months," she said, her voice breaking at just the right moment. "I had to ask my mother for grocery money last week. Tyler keeps asking me why his father doesn't care about him anymore." The courtroom ate it up. I could see people in the gallery shaking their heads at me, this terrible excuse for a man who would let his own child go without. The judge looked at me like I was something he'd scrape off his shoe. My attorney tried to jump in, but it was like trying to stop a freight train with a fly swatter. Every time I opened my mouth to explain the truth, Diane would start crying again, and the judge would cut me off. The truth was simple. Every penny I made went straight to Diane, just like it had since our divorce 2 years ago. But she wasn't using that money on Tyler. She was blowing it on spa weekends, designer purses, and fancy dinners with her girlfriends. I had bank statements, receipts, everything to prove it, but nobody wanted to hear my side of the story. By the end of that hearing, the gavel came down like a death sentence. 6 months in county jail for contempt of court and failure to pay child support. 6 months to think about what kind of man abandons his child, the judge said. Walking into that cell, I felt more alone than I'd ever been in my life. But sitting there on that hard metal bunk, staring at concrete walls, something started nagging at me. Something about Diane's testimony felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Our marriage had been rocky for years before the divorce. Diane had always been secretive about certain things. Phone calls she'd take in the other room, weekend trips she claimed were for work, the way she'd get defensive when I asked simple questions about her day. There was this one time, maybe 3 years back, when I came home early from a job site and found a man's watch on our nightstand. When I asked about it, Diane got this weird look on her face and said it belonged to her brother, who'd stopped by to fix our bathroom faucet. But her brother lived in Seattle, and I'd never known him to do plumbing work. Then there were Tyler's features. Don't get me wrong, I loved that kid more than life itself. But sometimes I'd catch myself noticing things. He had these green eyes that neither Diane nor I had. His hair was this sandy brown color that seemed to come from nowhere in our families. Little details that I'd pushed aside because I didn't want to think about what they might mean. But now, locked in that cell with nothing but time to think, those doubts started eating at me. What if Tyler wasn't mine? What if everything I believed about my life was built on lies? The idea seemed crazy at first. Diane and I had been together for 3 years before Tyler was born. We were planning our wedding, talking about the future. But the more I thought about it, the more those little inconsistencies started adding up. I remembered how she used to work late at the accounting firm, sometimes not coming home until after midnight. She'd always have explanations, big client deadlines, important meetings. But looking back, those explanations felt rehearsed. And there was her co-worker, Brian. He was always coming up in conversation, always the hero of some story she'd tell about work. Brian helped me figure out that spreadsheet. Or, Brian gave me a ride when my car wouldn't start. I'd met him once at the company Christmas party, and something about the way they looked at each other made my stomach twist. By my second week in jail, I couldn't take the uncertainty anymore. I called my lawyer from the payphone and told him I needed a paternity test. He thought I was losing my mind at first. "Warren, this isn't going to help your case," he said. "Even if Tyler isn't biologically yours, you've been acting as his father for 8 years. The court will still hold you responsible for support." But I didn't care about the legal technicalities anymore. I needed to know the truth, even if it destroyed me. It took weeks to get the court to approve the test. Weeks of sitting in that cell, counting ceiling tiles and wrestling with thoughts that kept me awake at night. What would I do if Tyler really wasn't mine? How could I face him? How could I face myself? The day the results came back, I was in the middle of reading a paperback novel someone had left behind when the guard walked up to my cell with an envelope. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely open it. I unfolded the paper and tried to focus on the words, but they seemed to swim around on the page. Then I saw the line that changed everything. Probability of paternity, 0. I had to read it 3 times before it sank in. Tyler wasn't my son. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike, helped with homework, cheered for at Little League games, he wasn't mine. I don't remember sitting down, but suddenly I was on the floor of that cell, my back against the cold concrete wall. 8 years of my life had been built on a lie. 8 years of loving a child who belonged to someone else. 8 years of marriage to a woman who'd been playing me for a fool. The grief hit me first. This overwhelming sadness for the relationship I'd lost, for the illusion that had been shattered. But then came the anger, a white-hot rage that made my hands shake and my vision blur. Diane hadn't just lied to me about Tyler's paternity. She'd used that lie to control me, manipulate me, and ultimately destroy me. When our marriage fell apart, she'd weaponized my love for Tyler to squeeze every last dollar out of me. And when that wasn't enough, she dragged me through court and had me thrown in jail. The betrayal ran so deep, I couldn't find the bottom of it. This wasn't just about infidelity or deceit. This was about 8 years of my life that had been stolen from me. 8 years of working overtime to provide for a family that wasn't mine. 8 years of sleepless nights, worrying about a child's future, only to discover I'd never had any claim to him in the first place. But as I sat there, in that cell, crumpling the test results in my fist, I made myself a promise. Diane thought she'd broken me. She thought I'd just roll over and take whatever punishment she wanted to dish out. She was wrong. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The next few days passed in a haze of rage and planning. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. All I could think about was how Diane had orchestrated this whole charade. She'd lied to me, lied to Tyler, lied to the court, and probably lied to everyone else in her life. When I finally got another chance to call my lawyer, my voice was steady for the first time since receiving those results. "We have the paternity test," I told him. "Now I want her destroyed." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Warren, what exactly are you thinking?" "File the motion to overturn the support order," I said. "And then I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person Diane really is." The legal process moved quickly once we had the DNA evidence. The court had no choice but to acknowledge that I'd been wrongfully imprisoned and ordered to pay support for a child that wasn't mine. The charges were dropped, the support order was vacated, and I was released. But walking out of that jail didn't feel like freedom. Not yet. Diane had taken 8 years of my life, my savings, my reputation, and my relationship with a boy I'd raised as my own son. The scales weren't even close to balanced. I drove straight to Diane's house, that DNA test burning a hole in my jacket pocket. It was time for some answers. She answered the door, looking annoyed, like I was interrupting something important. "Warren, what are you doing here? Aren't you supposed to be in jail?" I held up the folded paper, watching her face change as she realized what it was. "We need to talk, Diane. Right now." Her confident expression faltered, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. She stepped aside to let me in, but I could see her mind working, probably trying to figure out how to spin this new development. We stood in her living room, the same room where I'd played board games with Tyler, where we'd decorated Christmas trees as a family. Now, it felt like enemy territory. "How long?" I asked, keeping my voice calm despite the storm raging inside me. "How long what?" she replied, but her voice wavered. I unfolded the test results and set them on her coffee table. "How long have you known that Tyler isn't mine?" The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. I watched her shoulders sag as the weight of her deception finally caught up with her. "I suspected," she whispered, not meeting my eyes. "Suspected?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You suspected for 8 years and never said a word. You let me believe he was my son, you took my money, you had me thrown in jail, and you suspected?" She finally looked at me, and I saw something I'd never seen in her eyes before. Genuine remorse mixed with panic. I wasn't sure. I hoped. I thought maybe if I never brought it up, it wouldn't matter. Wouldn't matter? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. 8 years of my life, Diane. 8 years of loving a child, providing for him, being his father. And you thought it wouldn't matter? Tears started forming in her eyes, but I was past caring about her pain. "I did what I thought was best for Tyler," she said. "He needed stability, and you were good to him. I didn't want to hurt anyone." "Hurt anyone?" I shook my head in disbelief. "You've destroyed my life, Diane. You've lied to Tyler his entire life, and you did it all to protect yourself." She reached for me, but I stepped back. "Warren, please. I never meant for it to go this far. When we started having problems, I panicked. I thought if I could just keep things together." "By lying to everyone around you," I finished. "Who is he, Diane? Who's Tyler's real father?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. I could see her calculating, trying to decide how much truth she could get away with. "It was Brian," she said finally, her voice barely audible. The name hit me like a physical blow. Brian Morrison, her co-worker. The man who was always showing up in her stories, always helping her with some problem or another. The man I'd shaken hands with at that Christmas party while he stood there, knowing he'd fathered my son. "Brian," I repeated, tasting the betrayal. "Your co-worker Brian, the one you've been working late with all these years." She nodded, tears streaming down her face now. "It wasn't supposed to happen. We were working on this big project, spending long hours together. One thing led to another, and then I found out I was pregnant. And you just decided to lie to me about it. I thought it would be easier," she sobbed. "You were so excited about being a father, and Brian was married. I thought if I just kept quiet, everyone would be better off." I stared at her, amazed by her selfishness. "Everyone except me, right? I'm the one who gets to pay for your mistakes." She tried to defend herself, but I wasn't listening anymore. The betrayal was complete now. Not just my wife cheating, but my best friend from work being involved. Brian had sat through company barbecues, holiday parties, birthday celebrations, all while knowing he was Tyler's biological father. He'd watched me worry about Tyler's grades, celebrate his achievements, and pour my heart into being the best father I could be. "Does Tyler know?" I asked. Diane shook her head. "I couldn't tell him. How do you explain something like that to a child?" "The same way you should have explained it to me 8 years ago," I said, "with the truth." I turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "This isn't over, Diane. You've taken everything from me, but I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you really are." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal action and personal reckoning. My lawyer helped me file motions to recover the money I'd paid in child support, and we began building a case for fraud and emotional distress. But the legal system moves slowly, and I needed something more immediate. I decided to start with Brian. If he thought he could hide behind ignorance and keep living his comfortable life while I dealt with the wreckage, he was mistaken. I knew where he liked to grab drinks after work, a sports bar near the office where he'd hold court with whoever would listen to his stories. I found him there on a Thursday evening, laughing with a couple of guys from accounting. When he saw me walk in, his face went white. He knew exactly why I was there. "We need to talk," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. He glanced at his drinking buddies, clearly embarrassed. "Maybe we should do this somewhere else." "No," I said, loud enough for the whole bar to hear. "I think right here is perfect. These are your co-workers, right? They should know what kind of man they've been drinking with." Brian's friends looked confused, but they could sense the tension. A few people at nearby tables started paying attention. 8 years, I said, staring Brian down. 8 years you watched me raise your son and never said a word. The bar got very quiet, very quickly. Brian's face was red now, sweat beading on his forehead. "Warren, I can explain," he started, but I cut him off. "Explain what? How you slept with my wife, and then let me pay for the consequences. How you sat through Tyler's birthday parties and watched me be a father to your child." One of his drinking buddies stood up and walked away, clearly uncomfortable. The other one just stared, probably trying to process what he was hearing. "I didn't know what to do," Brian said quietly. "By the time I figured it out, too much time had passed. I thought it was better to let me live a lie." I leaned in closer. "Better to let me go to jail for child support for your kid?" The bartender was watching now, probably wondering if he needed to call security. But I wasn't done. "Does your wife know?" I asked. Brian's silence was answer enough. "She doesn't, does she? You've been lying to everyone. Diane, me, your wife, your own son. What kind of man does that make you?" I didn't wait for an answer. I'd said what I came to say. But as I walked toward the door, I called back loud enough for everyone to hear. "Tyler Morrison deserves to know who his real father is, and your wife deserves to know what kind of man she married." The aftermath was swift and brutal. Word spread through their office like wildfire. Brian's wife confronted him, and their marriage imploded within days. He was demoted at work and eventually transferred to a different department to avoid the gossip and awkward stares. Diane tried damage control, but it was too late. The truth was out, and people started connecting the dots. Her carefully constructed image as the wronged single mother crumbled as friends and family learned about the lies she'd built her life on. But the hardest part was telling Tyler. He was 8 years old, and his whole world was about to change. I asked Diane if I could be the one to talk to him, and surprisingly, she agreed. We met at a park where I'd taken him to play countless times. He ran over to me with that huge smile that had always melted my heart, and I realized this might be the last time he'd look at me that way. "Tyler, buddy," I said as we sat on a bench, "we need to have an important talk." I tried to explain it in terms he could understand, that sometimes adults make mistakes, that DNA tests can tell us about families, that love doesn't depend on biology. He cried, and I cried with him, but I promised him that no matter what, I would always care about him. "Are you still going to be my dad?" he asked through his tears. "I'll always love you," I told him. "But you have another dad out there who needs to be part of your life too." It was the hardest conversation I'd ever had, but Tyler deserved honesty after living with lies for so long. The legal battles continued for months, but eventually I recovered most of the money I'd paid in fraudulent child support. More importantly, I'd reclaimed my reputation and my sense of self-worth. Diane and Brian's relationship didn't survive the exposure. She tried to convince him to leave his wife and be a real family with her and Tyler, but he wasn't ready for that level of responsibility. Last I heard, she was struggling to make ends meet without my financial support, working 2 jobs to pay her bills. Brian's marriage didn't survive either, but he did start spending time with Tyler and paying actual child support. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was slowly building a relationship with the son he'd abandoned for 8 years. As for me, I moved across town and started rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy. 8 years of deception leaves scars that take time to heal. But for the first time since my divorce, I felt free. Free from Diane's manipulation, free from the financial burden that had been slowly destroying me, and free from the lies that had shaped my entire adult life. Looking back now, I can see that spending those weeks in jail was actually a blessing in disguise. It gave me the time and motivation to uncover the truth that had been hidden from me for so long. Without that forced isolation, I might have gone on believing Diane's lies for the rest of my life. The betrayal still hurts sometimes, especially when I think about Tyler and the relationship we'll never have. But I've learned that the truth, no matter how painful, is always better than living with lies. Diane and Brian thought they could build their happiness on my ignorance and suffering. But in the end, the truth set me free, while their deceptions destroyed them. The months following my confrontation with Brian brought a strange sense of justice. Word had spread throughout our social circles about what Diane and Brian had done, and the court of public opinion was not kind to either of them. Diane found herself increasingly isolated as friends and family members learned the truth about her deception. Her sister called me one evening, apologizing for not believing me sooner. "I always thought something was off about Diane's stories," she admitted, "but I never imagined she'd go this far." Even Diane's mother, who had always treated me coldly during our marriage, reached out to express her shame over her daughter's actions. Brian's situation deteriorated even faster. His wife had filed for divorce within 2 weeks of learning about Tyler, and she wasn't being quiet about the reasons. She told everyone who would listen about his 8-year affair and abandonment of his biological son. His reputation at work was destroyed, and several clients specifically requested that he not be assigned to their accounts. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when I ran into Diane at the grocery store about 4 months after everything came to light. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her usually perfect appearance disheveled. She was buying generic brands and using coupons, a far cry from the luxurious lifestyle she'd maintained with my money. "Warren," she said when she saw me, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded politely, but didn't slow down. I had nothing left to say to her. "Wait," she called after me. "Please, I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I regret what I did to you." I stopped and turned around, studying her face. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely remorseful, rather than just sorry she'd been caught. "I appreciate that, Diane," I said, "but your regrets don't give me back 8 years of my life." She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I know, I wanted you to know that Tyler asks about you sometimes. He misses you." That hit harder than I expected. Despite everything, I still cared about Tyler. He was an innocent victim in all of this, caught between adults who had made terrible decisions. "How is he adjusting?" I asked, surprising myself by wanting to know. "It's been hard," she admitted. "Brian comes around once a week now, But Tyler doesn't understand why everything changed so suddenly. He keeps asking when you're coming home. I felt my chest tighten. What do you tell him? The truth, she said. That adults sometimes make mistakes that hurt the people they love. That you still care about him, but that things are different now. We stood there in awkward silence for a moment, surrounded by other shoppers going about their ordinary lives. Finally, I spoke again. Take care of yourself, Diane. And take care of Tyler. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I will. And Warren. I hope someday you can find peace with all of this. As I walked away, I realized that I already had found peace, at least more than I'd expected to. The anger that had consumed me for months was finally starting to fade, replaced by a quiet satisfaction that the truth had come out and justice had been served. The legal proceedings wrapped up a few months later. I recovered almost all of the child support money I'd paid over the years, plus additional damages for fraud and emotional distress. My lawyer had been thorough in documenting how Diane's lies had affected my life, my career, and my mental health. But money wasn't really what mattered anymore. What mattered was that I'd reclaim my life and my self-respect. I'd refused to be a victim of someone else's deception, and I'd made sure that Diane and Brian faced consequences for their actions. I started dating again, cautiously at first. The betrayal had left me with trust issues that took time to work through. But eventually, I met a woman named Susan through a hiking group I'd joined. She was divorced too, and she understood the pain of having your life turned upside down by someone you trusted. We took things slowly, building our relationship on honesty and mutual respect. When I told her about Diane and Tyler and everything I'd been through, she listened without judgment and offered support without trying to fix everything. You're a good man, Warren, she told me one evening as we watched the sunset from a trail overlooking the valley. What happened to you wasn't fair, but the way you handled it shows your character. I appreciated her words, but more than that, I appreciated having someone in my life who valued truth and integrity. After years of living with Diane's lies and manipulation, being with someone genuine felt like breathing clean air after being trapped in a smoky room. About a year after the divorce was finalized, I got an unexpected phone call from Brian. He was calling to ask if I would be willing to meet with him and Tyler. Apparently, Tyler had been asking questions about me, and Brian thought it might help the boy if we could all sit down together. I was hesitant at first. I'd worked hard to move on from that chapter of my life, and I wasn't sure I wanted to reopen old wounds. But Susan encouraged me to consider it, pointing out that Tyler was still just a child who was trying to make sense of his world. You don't owe them anything, she said, but you might be able to help Tyler understand that none of this was his fault. We met at a family restaurant on a Saturday afternoon. Tyler was bigger than I remembered, losing some of that little boy roundness that had made him so adorable. He seemed shy when he saw me, hiding behind Brian's legs until I knelt down to his level. Hey, buddy, I said softly. How are you doing? He looked at Brian for permission, then back at me. I missed you, he said quietly. Those 3 words nearly broke my heart. I pulled him into a hug, fighting back tears. I missed you too, Tyler. Brian and I managed to have a civil conversation, while Tyler played with the toys he'd brought. We talked about custody arrangements, about how to help Tyler adjust, about the future. It was awkward and painful, but it was also necessary. I want you to know, Brian said at one point, that I never intended for things to go as far as they did. I was a coward, and I let you pay for my mistakes. I'm trying to do better now. I appreciated his apology, even if it couldn't undo the damage that had been done. Tyler's what matters now, I told him. He needs stability and honesty from the adults in his life. We agreed that I could see Tyler occasionally if he wanted to. Not as his father, but as someone who cared about him. It wasn't the same as the relationship we'd had before, but it was something. As time went on, those visits became easier. Tyler gradually adjusted to the new reality of his life, and I found that I could enjoy spending time with him without the complicated emotions that had initially overwhelmed me. He was still a great kid, and I was glad to be able to maintain some connection with him. Diane eventually moved to another state with Tyler, seeking a fresh start, away from the judgment and gossip that followed her in our hometown. Before they left, she called me one last time. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said, "but I want you to know that I'm grateful for everything you did for Tyler when you thought he was yours. You were a better father to him than I had any right to expect." "He's a good kid," I replied. "He deserved to have someone who cared about him." "He did," she said, "and he was lucky to have you, even if it was built on a lie." After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen thinking about everything that had happened. The betrayal still hurt sometimes, but it had also taught me valuable lessons about trust, about the importance of truth, and about my own strength. I'd survived something that could have destroyed me, and I'd come out stronger on the other side. Susan and I eventually got married in a simple ceremony, surrounded by friends and family who truly cared about us. It was everything my first wedding hadn't been: honest, genuine, and built on a foundation of trust and mutual respect. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the 8 years I spent believing Tyler was my son. The answer is complicated. I regret being lied to, I regret being manipulated, and I regret the financial and emotional toll it took on my life. But I don't regret loving Tyler or being there for him when he needed a father figure. The experience taught me that love isn't always about biology or legal documents. Sometimes it's about showing up for someone who needs you, even when the circumstances are complicated. I was a father to Tyler for 8 years, and nothing can take away the memories we made during that time. I'm 54 now, starting the next chapter of my life with Susan by my side. We talk about maybe having children of our own, or adopting, or just enjoying our life together as it is. Whatever we decide, it will be based on honesty and mutual choice, rather than deception and manipulation. Looking back, I can see that Diane and Brian's betrayal, as painful as it was, ultimately freed me from a life built on lies. They thought they could use me and discard me when it was convenient, but in the end, their deceptions destroyed them, while I found genuine happiness. I still think about Tyler sometimes, wondering how he's doing in his new life. I hope he's happy and healthy, and I hope he knows that regardless of biology or complicated adult situations, there was a time when someone loved him unconditionally and would have done anything to protect him. That love was real, even if everything else was a lie. And in the end, that's something Diane and Brian can never take away from me. The truth may have been painful to discover, but it set me free to build a life based on honesty and genuine connection. I'm grateful for that freedom, even though it came at such a high cost. Sometimes, the most difficult experiences teach us the most valuable lessons about who we really are and what we're capable of surviving. I'm 54 years old, happily married to someone who values truth as much as I do, and finally, at peace with my past. That's more than I ever thought possible during those dark days in that county jail cell. And it's more than Diane and Brian achieved with all their lies and schemes.